Michael hadn't opened that folder in nearly 6 years. He thought he never would again. His brother-in-law had received his green card. The family celebrated. Life moved on. The paperwork disappeared into a filing cabinet, and so did Michael's memory of one document, the I-864 Affidavit of Support. Then one unexpected conversation changed everything. Michael opened the old folder, pulled out the I-864, looked at his signature, and quietly asked himself, how could something I signed years ago still matter today? Like most sponsors, Michael believed the immigration process ended the day the green card was approved. He thought the I-864 was simply another form needed to help his family member immigrate. He was wrong. The green card ended one part of the journey. The I-864 could continue under its own legal terms. And that's the liability trap. Not because sponsors are careless, not because they intended to make a mistake, but because many families spend months learning how to get a green card, and almost no time learning what the I-864 actually means after the approval arrives. Dotted quotes, a trap, because it doesn't end when most sponsors think it does. In today's video, we'll walk through 4 misunderstandings that catch sponsors by surprise. You, quote, "You'll learn why the green card doesn't always end a sponsor's responsibility, why one life event that many people believe changes everything may not, the legal milestones that generally bring the obligation to an end, and the practical steps every sponsor should take to better understand the promise they signed. Because sometimes the biggest immigration mistake isn't signing a document. It quotes, forgetting what that document still means years later. Mistake 1. Thinking the green card ends your responsibility. Michael looked at the date beside his signature. Almost 6 years had passed. At first, he smiled. 6 years felt like a long time. In Michael's mind, 6 years was more than enough time for any promise to fade into the past. The immigration case had been approved. His brother-in-law had built a new life in America. Everything seemed finished. So why was he reading this document again? Because Michael had confused the end of the immigration process with the end of his responsibility as a sponsor. And that misunderstanding is far more common than most people realize. For many families, immigration feels like a race. You gather documents, you file petitions, you answer requests for evidence, you wait, you attend interviews. Then finally, the green card arrives. Crossing that finish line feels like the end of the story. But when it comes to the I-864, the green card approval and the sponsor's legal commitment don't necessarily end on the same day. That quotes because the I-864 isn't simply paperwork. It quotes a legal agreement signed as part of the immigration process. Think about it this way. Imagine helping your son buy his first home. The bank asks you to co-sign the loan. Months later, the loan is approved. Everyone celebrates. The application process is finished, but your legal commitment doesn't disappear simply because the approval happened. The approval ended one process. The agreement continued under its own terms. The I-864 works in a similar way. Now imagine an immigration officer reviewing a family-based green card application. By the time the officer reaches the I-864, most eligibility questions have already been answered. One important question remains. Who has accepted the legal responsibility required for this part of the immigration process? That's why the I-864 matters. Not because it's the longest immigration form. Not because it's the most difficult to complete. But because it creates a legal commitment that deserves to be understood, not simply signed. Michael slowly turned another page. For the first time, he wasn't reading the document just to remember what it said. He was trying to understand what it actually meant. Then another thought crossed his mind. If the green card didn't automatically end this responsibility, what does? Michael closed the folder for a moment. For the first time in nearly 6 years, he realized he didn't actually know the answer. And like thousands of sponsors across the country, he was about to discover that the law measures this promise differently than most families expect. That quotes where the next misunderstanding begins. Mistake 2. Believing divorce automatically ends the I-864. Michael couldn't stop thinking about one question. If the green card doesn't end my responsibility, what does? Like many sponsors, the first answer that came to his mind was simple. Divorce. It seemed logical. If a marriage ends, surely the sponsorship ends too. After all, many family-based green card cases begin because of a marriage. If that relationship no longer exists, wouldn't the legal responsibility disappear with it? Michael believed that for years. And so do many sponsors. But this is where immigration law surprises people. Because family relationships and legal agreements don't always follow the same timeline. A marriage can end. People can move into separate homes. They can build completely different lives. They may stop speaking altogether. Those are deeply personal changes. But they are not, by themselves, the legal events that automatically end an I-864 obligation. That quote as the moment many sponsors pause. Because it feels different from how most people naturally think. Michael went back to the agreement. This time he wasn't looking for comforting words. He was looking for one sentence. Where does it say this responsibility ends if the marriage ends? He read the pages carefully, but he couldn't find those words because they weren't there. The agreement doesn't ask whether a relationship survived. It points to specific legal milestones that determine when the sponsor's obligation generally comes to an end. That changed everything for Michael. He realized he had been asking the wrong question. For years, he kept asking, what if our relationship changes? The better question was, what event does the law recognize? Those are two very different questions. Now imagine an immigration officer looking at the same situation. The officer isn't asking, did this couple stay together? The officer is asking, has one of the legal events that ends this obligation occurred? That difference is easy to miss, but it's one of the biggest reasons sponsors misunderstand the I-864. The immigration system doesn't base legal obligations on assumptions. It bases them on legal standards. And that's why relying on common sense alone can lead people in the wrong direction. Michael leaned back in his chair. For the first time, he realized the law wasn't being unfair. It was simply following rules he had never taken the time to understand. Then another question came to mind. If divorce isn't one of the automatic ending points, what actually is? The answer isn't hidden. But it is often overlooked. Because the law recognizes only a limited number of legal milestones that generally bring the I-864 obligation to an end. Understanding those milestones may be the most important thing any sponsor learns after signing this document. And that's exactly where we're going next. The 5 legal exit ramps every sponsor should understand. Michael had spent years believing one thing, that enough time would eventually bring every responsibility to an end. Now he understood something very different. The I-864 isn't measured by the calendar. It measured by specific legal milestones. For many sponsors, that's the biggest surprise of all. The law doesn't ask, how many years have passed? It asks, has one of the legal events that ends this obligation actually happened? Those are two completely different questions. Think of the I-864 like a highway. Once you sign it, you're traveling down a legal road. Most people believe they can leave that road whenever enough time has passed. But the law doesn't work that way. Instead, there are only a limited number of legal exit ramps. The first is when the sponsored immigrant becomes a United States citizen. For many families, that's the outcome everyone hopes to reach. Once citizenship is granted, the sponsor's obligation under the I-864 generally comes to an end. The second involves qualifying work under the Social Security system. This is where many people become confused. The law isn't simply counting calendar years. It looks at qualifying work history. That quote is an important difference. The third is when the sponsored immigrant permanently leaves the United States and gives up lawful permanent resident status. Taking a long vacation or spending time overseas isn't automatically the same thing. What matters is the legal status itself. The fourth is the death of either the sponsor or the sponsored immigrant. It quotes, not something families like to think about. But it is one of the legal ending events recognized under the law. Finally, there are certain other legal circumstances recognized under immigration law that may end a sponsor's obligation. The important lesson isn't memorizing every legal detail. The important lesson is understanding that the obligation ends because the law recognizes a specific event, not because time passed, not because a relationship changed, and not because we assumed it should. Michael looked back at the calendar hanging on the wall. 6 years had made him feel safe. Now he realized the calendar had never answered the real question. The legal milestones did. That single realization completely changed the way he understood the 864, and it raised one final question. If this agreement is still active, what does that actually mean for someone like me? That's the question every sponsor eventually asks, and it's where the real meaning of the I-864 begins. The liability. Most sponsors never fully understand. Michael sat quietly for a moment. He realized something that had never crossed his mind before. The greatest risk wasn't signing the I-864. The greatest risk was believing he already understood it. Here quotes something that's important to remember. Most sponsors never experience a problem. They help a family member. The immigration case is approved. Life moves forward. Years pass without anyone mentioning the I-864 again. And that's exactly why so many people forget about it. Not because they're irresponsible, because nothing ever happened to remind them. Until one day, a question comes up, a family situation changes, someone starts looking through old paperwork, or they simply realize they never understood the document they signed years earlier. The I-864 is a legally enforceable agreement. That doesn't mean every sponsor will face legal action. It doesn't mean every family will experience a dispute. But it does mean the document continues to have legal significance while it remains in effect. And that's why understanding it matters. Think about it like homeowners insurance. You hope you'll never need it. You probably don't think about the policy every day, but if something unexpected happens, the exact language of that agreement suddenly becomes very important. The I-864 works in a similar way. Most families never think about it after the green card is approved, but if questions arise years later, understanding what you agreed to can make a tremendous difference. Michael finally understood what he wished someone had explained from the very beginning. The purpose wasn't to make sponsors afraid. The purpose was to make sure sponsors understood the commitment they were making. So, what should every sponsor do? Start by finding your copy of the I-864, if you still have it. Read it again. Not to look for problems, but to understand the agreement with fresh eyes. If you no longer have a copy, there may be ways to request records related to your immigration file, or determine what documentation is available. And if your circumstances have changed significantly since you signed the I-864, consider speaking with a qualified immigration attorney so you understand how the law applies to your specific situation. Knowledge is almost always better than assumptions. Michael carefully placed the I-864 back into the folder. This time, he didn't put it away because he wanted to forget it. He put it away because he finally understood it. And sometimes, that's the greatest protection any sponsor can have. Michael slid the folder back into the filing cabinet. It was the same folder. The same signature. The same document. Nothing inside had changed. But Michael had. He finally understood something he wished someone had explained years earlier. The I-864 wasn't just another form he signed during the immigration process. It was a legal commitment that deserved to be understood before it was forgotten. That quotes the real lesson from today's story. The goal isn't to make sponsors worried. The goal is to make sponsors informed. Because informed families make better decisions. If you sponsored a husband, a wife, a parent, a child, or another qualifying relative, take a few minutes this week to think about one simple question. Do I actually understand the document I signed? If the answer is yes, that's excellent. If the answer is no, today is a good day to learn more. Find your copy of the I-864 if you still have it. Read it carefully. If you no longer have it, look into what records may be available for your immigration file. And if your family's circumstances have changed significantly since you signed it, consider getting advice from a qualified immigration attorney who can explain how the law applies to your situation. One final thought. Immigration law is full of forms. But some forms ask for information. The I-864 asks for a promise. And promises deserve to be understood. Not feared. Not ignored. Simply understood. Because the strongest protection for any sponsor isn't guessing what the law says. It, quote, taking the time to understand it before questions arise. Thank you for spending these minutes with us. If this guide helped you better understand the I-864, share it with a family member or friend who may be preparing to sponsor someone or who already has. You may help them avoid one of the most common misunderstandings in the immigrationprocess.com. And if you'd like more straightforward immigration and legal guidance designed for everyday families, subscribe to LawShieldUSA.com. We publish practical videos that explain complicated rules in clear, simple language so you can make informed decisions with confidence. .com. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. .com. And we'll see you in the next LawShield USA guide.